started. So we will have Lori Taylor read our housekeeping announcement for us.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is RCEA Board Clerk Lori Taylor. Before Chair Sarah Schaefer calls this in-person and online meeting to order, here are some announcements. For those of you here in the Warpinter building, as you are aware, the microphones are on. Throughout the meeting, identify yourself when you're speaking if you can, and one speaker at a time, please, so that the online participants can follow and hear what is being said. For people participating in the public comment periods, please come, well, there's no one here in person, but online participants, click the raise hand button in the webinar controls. Phone participants, press *9 to raise your hand. Public comment may be limited to 3 minutes at the chair's discretion. Please raise your hand early so staff doesn't miss you. You can email public comments before and during the meeting until public comment period is closed, and email public comment at redwoodenergy.org. Remote participants, if you experience phone or internet disruptions during this meeting, please notify us if you can by calling or texting 707-382-7336 or by emailing public comment at redwoodenergy.org. That's all for participation announcements. Chair Schaefer.
All right, thank you, Lori. We do not have any remote participants today, so we can move over that and go to roll call.
Okay, Director Arroyo.
Here.
Vice Chair Bauer is going to be a bit delayed. Director Jorgensen. Here. Director Losi. I'm sorry, not Losi, Director Mobley.
Here.
Thank you.
Wait.
Director Myers is absent. Director Ramos.
Here.
Director Scafani. Here. Vice Chair, Chair Schaefer.
Here.
Director Tuttle is absent. Director Wilson.
Here.
And Director Wu.
Here.
There is a quorum for both regular and CCs.
All right. Thank you, folks. Okay, that takes us then to our reports from member entities. Does anybody have anything that they would like to report out on from their communities?
I have a little something.
Yeah, go ahead, Elise.
The city of Blue Lake has taken possession of the old power plant site. Sounds like so when and how that's going to be my RCEA, I couldn't say, but one of the pieces of information. Very cool.
Yes, Natalie.
I was able to go to the California State Association of Counties legislative conference last week in Sacramento. But one of the things that was pretty cool was that I co-chair the Coastal Counties Policy Committee. And our guest was our very own, formerly very own Jana Gagnon. And so she came to speak about, as the new, senior advisor to the governor about offshore wind to the group. And there was a good discussion about offshore wind and a lot of interest from coastal counties and figuring out what, county roles are and local government roles are to participate in the process, since it's still a bit unclear to us exactly what role local governments and CCAs for that matter will play in the whole process. So that was, certainly informative. And then I've been tracking and really keenly interested in the transmission recommendations for CAISO that came forward at the last CAISO meeting, which do indicate that Humboldt will be a location for the onshore, for an onshore substation in the Humboldt Bay area. And then there will be 2 additional 500 kilovolt lines going to essentially the Red Bluff area thereabouts, and then to Solano County. So if folks haven't seen that yet, that's it's interesting because we weren't sure if the power would be onshore here or brought somewhere else essentially, and bypass us. So I think that offers some potential opportunities there. And certainly more, hopefully more resilience and investment in our grid. So I was pretty excited to see that. And that's all I've got for now.
Awesome. Thank you, Natalie. Yeah, and just going from that point, I'm excited to travel with you and some of our lovely RCEA staff and all of the different hats that we wear to Massachusetts, go see what it looks like in reality and how it's being implemented out there and what offshore wind can look like on the ground. So it'll be a great opportunity for a lot of our local Humboldt County community to get some of that information and see how it can really work here. All right, any other reports from the board here? If not, we'll move into oral and written communications. Not seeing anybody in the room. This time is to address the board on matters not on the agenda. Do we have anybody online? Okay. I guess people just didn't know we were having a meeting or something. Okay, so that takes us to consent calendar. All matters on the consent calendar are considered to be routine by the board and are acted in one motion. There's no separate discussion. If discussion is required, an item can be removed and considered separately. At the end of the reading of consent calendar, board members or members of the public can request that an item be removed for discussion. So item 4.1, approved minutes of March 28th, 2024 board meeting. Item 4.2, approved disbursements report. And item 4.3, accept the financial reports. Do you have anybody that would like to remove anything from the consent calendar? Or we could take a motion? Well, see if there's anybody to comment online. A second. Okay, so we had a motion and a second. All in favor? Remote Sweden. Roll call. Okay, so we'll do just a general vote, and so we'll do a show of hands. So if you're aye, put a hand up so Lori can see you.
Motion
Yeah,
passes.
yeah.
May I have the second, please?
It was Chris.
Okay.
All right, so that's gonna take us into our old CCE business, and we do have a CCE quorum, and so this is gonna be item 6.1, energy risk management quarterly report, and I know that Jacqueline Carr is here from the Energy Authority on Zoom, I assume.
We're promoting her now.
Yes, you can start the lady.
Okay.
She should be done.
And I'll just mention Richard Engel is coming. He was attending a biomap meeting before this, and so he'll be here before the meeting's over.
Hello, everyone. You can hear me all right? Sorry I couldn't be there in person, but looking forward to talking through the energy risk management report with you all. So let's get into it. Next slide, please. So overall financial drivers, unfortunately, some more red text than green text, and we'll get into what's driving that. But first, kind of just on the first positive news, if we've had some small changes in expected 2024 PG&E rates, and Redwood Coast will match kind of those rate changes while still providing a discount to your customers. One change already happened in March, and then there's another one forecasted to occur over the summer. And so that will result in a small positive change for expected revenues. Much more significant is a big change in the 2025 and 2026 rates. And this is quite large in 2025 to the tune of a negative $15 million impact. And what's happening there basically is over the past, I want to say 3 to 4 months, we've seen significant drop off in power prices, which changes the revenues that PG&E needs to collect for a generation, for its generation rate, and also changes the amount of revenues that its legacy power plants, which are represented in RCEA's PCAA rate, the amount that they collect in the market. They collect less, so that means that the PCAA rate must go up. So those are kind of two major changes being driven by market price fundamentals, is what's changing that significant change in the PG&E rate forecast. That being said, I know the older board members have heard me give doom and gloom, and then it's great a quarter later, and then it's doom and gloom again. I think there's a lot of time for rates for 2025 to play out, and we'll see how they change over the coming months. So it's negative at this moment. I wouldn't bet anything on that at this time. That being said, I do think that rates will overall probably not be increasing. It will probably have some negative impact when we get to the end of this year, when we lock in 2025 rates. And right now, slightly positive for 2026, even further out in the time horizon, less certainty. On net power costs, those price decreases I just mentioned, 2024 is down 15%. 25 and 26 are also down. That's improving Redwood's financial picture a fair amount. Unfortunately, you already have a number of hedges locked in. So while it is improving, some of that price certainty has already been locked in, which is good overall for your risk as a CCA, but means that you can't take advantage quite as much of these forward energy price decreases. As always, I don't think this bullet has changed in the past year. When I've been presenting, we've seen increased prices for environmental products, particularly RECs and carbon-free this year, significantly so in carbon-free actually, and capacity prices are generally increasing. That being said, I do want to note that there has been some decrease in prices for some of the summer months, such as July, as well as June. We've gone ahead and taken advantage of those lower prices to procure on behalf of Redwood to get you to full compliance for all of the summer months except for August and September. So that's great news, and we'll keep tracking August and September and see if we can get you to full compliance for those months as well. The biggest impact beyond that PG&E rate forecast change that is impacting Redwood's financial picture is a change in the RA compliance requirement. We're moving from what we're calling the traditional RA paradigm to the new slice of day RA paradigm. There's been a lot of process to get to where we are, and we're still working through a lot of compliance requirements kind of at the state level, which impacts how we can do the modeling. That being said, after discussion between TA staff and Redwood staff, we've changed how we're modeling your RA requirements to shift off of traditional RA for 2025 to the new regime of slice of day RA. And that change, unfortunately, has a big hit on your portfolio's current compliance or ability to meet compliance requirements, and changes the procurement needs that we're forecasting. So more on that later on the deck. We'll also talk a little bit more about traditional RA versus slice of day, just as a refresher for everyone. But moving on to the next slide, kind of what does this mean? So for 2024, slightly more positive, primarily due to that decrease in costs and a slight bump up in rates. But, the big picture here is 2025, which, was 15 million positive last time I came to speak to you in February, and now is quite in the negative. And so, the two main drivers there, as a reminder, are the fact that you have these this significant decrease in the expected rates for 2025, or the revenue collected from those rates, and then the slice of day modeling impact as well. So let's get into kind of the details there. Next slide. So on the rates, as a reminder, blue is the generation rate, red is the PCIA, solid is the current forecast, and dashed is the previous forecast. And so, if you look at that 2025 time period, it's all unfortunately less positive for Redwood from a revenue perspective than it was previously. So the generation rates are going down in the current forecast, which is great for PG&E and RCEA customers overall, but just means less money coming in. And then PG&E's legacy power plants are earning less money as forecasted in the markets in 2025, which means the PCIA needs to increase to compensate. And so that's bringing us back to a little closer to the historical PCIA values of over $20, whereas, this year they're closer to 10, and historically they've been as low as, 0 or close to it. So the revenue that Redwood collects is sort of the space between that blue line and the red line. And so as you can see, the blue line shifting down, the red line shifting up, that means that much less revenue to collect. Next slide. And then, just to dig into the energy market changes that are driving a fair amount of this rate change forecast. Again, solid lines are the current forecast. And dashed lines was what I was showing you back in February. Blue is on peak hours and orange is off peak. And the biggest story here is just how much of a drop we've seen in the on peak pricing and off peak as well for 2024 and then going into 2025. So, you know, that big drop off that we see in 2024 is what's actually driving some of that 2025 rate change. You know, the idea is that, you know, with the current energy forward marks where they are right now, the expectation is PG&E will be over collecting this year and then would need to decrease rates in order to make up for that fact next year. All right, next slide. So that's kind of covering my sort of main, you know, financial modeling materials. And I wanted to get into discussion of slice of day RA as a short, not exactly training, but a short just review to remind the board of kind of what the changes are in the RA compliance regime. But I wanted to pause for a moment there to see if there's any questions regarding the kind of general slides or the rate changes that I just discussed.
So the costs for the forward energy prices, are those being driven by specific projects or is it just kind of an amalgamation of things?
Yeah, so if you go back a slide to the forward energy prices and that big drop down, I'd say there's a few different things. One, I guess kind of the first thing is markets aren't rational, right? So prices were very high previously going into last summer. And then we had a very quiet summer. It was very cool for California overall. Prices never really got that high. And now the market is like reflecting that as we think about this coming summer. They're like, oh, okay, maybe we're going to have a summer like last summer. It'll be quiet. So, you know, that's been a driver of prices going down. And the long-term weather forecast isn't showing a particularly hot summer. It could be, but it's not that likely. Another kind of impact is California had a relatively great water year, you know, above average. And so that's helping with the expectations of the energy prices for the summer. There's also a lot more solar on the grid than there was even a year ago. And so that solar generation is depressing energy prices as well. And then finally, there's a lot more natural gas in storage for California. And natural gas is needed to run our peaker gas resources. And that gas is pretty cheap at this point. And so when gas prices go down, the gas peaker resources, which are on the margin, are the ones that are sort of setting the price during the summer period. It costs less to run them because their main fuel source is so much cheaper. So with lower gas prices and more volume available, that means that the gas-fired resources are less expensive to run, which means the expected pricing for the summer is lower. So that's kind of the three main causes, I'd say. You know, normal expectations for the weather, more hydro, more solar, and then cheap gas.
And going off of that, I mean, how did the PG&E rate increases then play into that? Because you kind of said that, you know, they're maybe increased them a lot this year and then kind of compensating for maybe lowering them next year. I mean, what does the forecast of that look like? And obviously that's directly, you know, correlated to the money we're bringing in, but.
Yeah, so the way the modeling works is it's always just a model. It's always just a forecast, and it can vary pretty tremendously. So just want to put that caveat there. But you know, PG&E in simplistic terms collects money to pay for generation over the course of the year. And then at the end of the year, it checks to see, you know, how much money did I collect and how much money did I need? And if I ended up over collecting, which is kind of what the forecasts are showing is likely now, then the next year's rates are set, you know, all things being equal, lower in order to relieve that burden of over collection and kind of, you know, give ratepayer relief and avoid PG&E having so much money in over collection. So right now what it's looking like is based on where energy markets are now, essentially PG&E set its rates too high for 2024. Back when it set its rates, it made sense based on what was being modeled. Now, things have shifted tremendously in the market curves. And so it looks like PG&E will overcollect. And so that then drives the 2025 rates to, in the forecast, look less. And this is, as a reminder, just on the generation in the PCIe. So it could be that, transmission and distribution could still go up. So, as all of us are paying that PG&E transmission distribution rate, like your bill might still go up in 2025, but that could be due to the transmission distribution costs and not the generation rate costs, which are what matters for Redwood's rate setting.
Thank you. Any other questions for Jacqueline before she moves on? All right. Oh yeah, go ahead, Frank.
I think you answered my question here in this your last statement about prices going down versus going up. So you're telling us the generation is essentially going down. So on our side, we'll have to drop our prices as well. Where PG&E is going to possibly, like maybe, raise their transmission rate.
Yeah, I don't really follow the transmission and distribution rate cases very closely, or the general rate case, which sets that. Just as someone who pays my PG&E bill, I'm aware that those rates have been going up, pretty significantly. And I've heard rumblings that the CPUC is approving additional transmission distribution rate increases for PG&E customers specifically. But again, I don't follow that very closely, so I couldn't make a forecast for what 25 will be for the all-in bill. Just that right now our modeling suggests that generation rates will be decreasing. And also, I want to be clear, if we go back one more slide, the PCIe going up is also pretty significant. Yes, the generation rate drop is higher, but one generation rate drop is good for kind of all ratepayers, whether you're a bundled customer or a PG&E customer. With the PCIe rate increase, that really impacts Redwood's customers specifically, because that eats into the margin that Redwood is collecting. So it's a combination of those two.
So there's no way that, because you don't follow transmission, there's no way, I know we've asked before about having to be able to explain to customers when their bill goes up, that whether it's generation or transmission, to be able to show that grid, because the impact seems to be going up higher, but yet generation is, I won't say it stands stable, but these gigantic swings that come from 24, 20, particularly to 25, has a pretty big impact on RCEA.
Yeah, I mean, I'll defer to maybe Sally and her staff on the talking points that they provide to Redwood's customers, but I do think that they have talking points regarding what components of their bills are under sort of Redwood's control. The fact that Redwood's generation rates are cheaper than PG&E's generation rates. I just say that I don't follow the transmission distribution rate cases closely enough to really comment on exactly what may or may not happen in 2025. But I'm pretty sure that Redwood staff, have, conversation topics for customers who are, interested in kind of how their bill breaks down.
Yeah, and we break out generation versus transmission and distribution for our customers to understand. And we just had a webinar where our staff just went into the details of understanding your bill and RCEA's portion versus that PG&E portion. And it's recorded and we have it linked online. And we'll continue every time there's rate changes to try to push that message out as much as possible, just to educate our customers on that difference.
That's all.
Any other questions, or I think you can move on to your next slides here, Jacqueline.
All right. So first, kind of a briefing on what we mean when we say traditional RA, and then I'll get into the changes that Slice of Day is bringing. So traditional RA I'm sure this is all familiar ground for everyone, but there's 3 products. There's system RA, there's local RA, and there's flexible RA. System RA is meant to ensure that the CAISO has enough resources to meet the system monthly peak. Any generator within California or dynamically interconnected to California can provide system RA. Local RA is to ensure that there are enough resources in specific load pockets throughout the state. Humboldt is one of those load pockets. So that if a transmission line or a big generator goes down, that load pocket can still maintain power. So for example, if 2 of the transmission lines go down into Humboldt, the CAISO still needs to plan to be able to maintain power, and that's typically done by Humboldt Bay Generating Station. Now, 2 transmission lines and Humboldt Bay Generating Station were to all go down, I don't think that power could be maintained, but the planning standard is to two major issues occurring on the grid and still being able to maintain power. And then finally, there's flexible RA, which is ensuring that the CAISO has enough resources that can be dispatched as needed and can ramp down during the morning, ramp down as the solar comes online, and then ramp back up in the evening as the solar goes offline and we hit peak energy needs in the state. So just resources that are very flexible and can move around their generation quickly. And so for slice of day, the biggest takeaway on this slide is just that it's only system RA that's changing. Of course, system RA is kind of the biggest main product, but we're only going to talk about system RA. Local RA and flexible RA are not relevant to kind of slice of day. Next slide. So California has been grappling with its RA program for quite a while. When RA was developed back in the early 2000s, the landscape was very different. There were 3 investor-owned utilities that were serving the massive majority of the load. There weren't a lot of renewables or use-limited resources like demand response on the grid. There was an additional nuke facility. There was more certainty in the hydro fleet being able to be there every year. And there was more gas-fired generation on, as well as, the IOUs were providing long-term tolling contracts with gas-fired facilities that gave kind of certainty that those facilities would stick around for the long term. We moved to today, and we have, yes, still the 3 IOUs, but also 25 CCAs, an additional 10 plus ESPs, all kind of working in this bilateral market for RA. All of the new resources that we've been bringing on, has typically been variable solar and wind, with use-limited demand response and battery storage as well. And then, the drought and the warming conditions means that we can't be guaranteed that any particular summer we're going to have a good hydro year. And we've been retiring nuke and gas-fired resources in the state. And most entities are now doing short-term RA contracting, which means that there is a lot more influx in terms of what those gas-fired generators and other generators can expect to get in terms of the RA program. This has made it really challenging for the state to plan to ensure that we're going to have enough resources to meet load at all times of the day, right? If you have primarily hydro, nuke, and gas-fired generation, all of those can run more or less around the clock throughout the year. And you don't really have to worry about the evening or the middle of the night. You just know it's going to be there. As you shift to a system where you have more solar, wind, and battery as kind of the base resources, well, the sun doesn't shine in the middle of the night, and sometimes the wind doesn't blow in the middle of the night, and we only have so many batteries, and most of them only last for about 4 hours. So how do you guarantee that you're going to have enough resources to meet load in the middle of the night? And so that's kind of been the problem that we've been grappling with. In addition, just every year, there's a new RA ruling from the CPUC that results in new RA rules, which has created this kind of like web of minutia of rules that give people like me job certainty, but don't, necessarily help the state out. And so it's kind of been like this really complex system that we've created that, isn't necessarily meeting the state's needs anymore. And so that was kind of issue that was brought to the state at the CPUC proceeding a few times. And, the decision was that we kind of need to wipe this slate clean and develop a new new RA program for system RA. Next slide. And as a backdrop to this, with all of these buyers in this bilateral market and a very tight supply, we've had RA prices go through the roof. So this is a chart that TA staff have developed. We used to not show this around, and now we are, just because it's so striking that we think it's really important for everyone who is thinking about RA to like see how much the prices have changed. But kind of the main thing to look at here is that, as we look forward in time, the price just keeps going up and up and up. So back, a few years ago when we were forecasting what prices would look like in 2023, we were saying, it'll stay elevated, but not too far within that $7 to $9 range. Now we get to 2024, we look at what prices are, and, they've gone through the roof to, $35 plus for an annual strip. So it's just really tremendous price increase of the type that you don't, see in your, general commodity markets. And so that makes procuring RA that much more challenging. And, if you look at the lines, the gray line, had some movement, and you see the orange and the blue, the big jump up in the earlier part of that chart. And that's being driven by, I would say, not just the complexity of RA and the fact that we are so tight of capacity as a system, but also the regulatory change that's happening with slice of day. Regulatory change means uncertainty. Uncertainty means prices increase, generally speaking. And so that's what we're really seeing as well, is that there's been, this step up function in terms of prices. Next slide. So, given all of that background, we're moving to slice of day as a state. And the plan is for this move to happen for the 2025 compliance year, which means the first time that this will be officially, a compliance showing will be at the end of October when we do the annual showing for 2025. So the shift of traditional RA to slice of day is sort of shown in the charts here. And again, don't get too into the details about like what the colors mean and everything like that. But, if you look at the chart on the left, this is kind of the resource stack that you used to have to meet to your compliance requirement, which is the black line. So your black line would be how much RA, a load serving entity or the system as a whole needs. And then you would have you stack up your solar resources, which provide a little bit, and then your gas-fired resources, and your hydro, and your wind, century, et cetera, until you got to that compliance requirement for that month, which was based off of the peak hour need, the 1 hour in the month where there would be the peak need. And that's kind of traditional RA, not just in California, but throughout the country. That's kind of what RA generally goes through, is like, what is the peak hour of need? Do you have enough resources to meet that need? Now California is moving to what we're calling slice of day, which is we look at the requirements of the system, or for one load serving entity within that system, and what is that load over the course of every hour of the day. And then in every hour of the day, do you have enough resources to meet that load requirement plus a planning reserve margin? So you can see the chart on the right, again, you have the same resource stack, but for example, solar is only showing up in the middle part of the day. That gray to the right of solar, where the system is peaking in the early evening hours, those are batteries coming online. And so slice of day is great in that it's making us be really certain that we truly do have enough resources to meet load in every hour of the day, right? That's reliability, certainty. So that's good. The difficulty is that, you have this trade-off of more certainty when it comes to reliability at additional complexity and potentially additional cost. So whereas previously Redwood would need to procure enough RA to meet 12 compliance showings, essentially 12 different numbers, one for each month, we now need to procure enough, thinking about every 24-hour slice on Redwood's worst day, i.e. the day when you have the most load in a given month. for every month. So that's 12 months times 24 hours. Each one of those months is 288 compliance requirements each year. And in order to be compliant, you need to meet compliance in every one of those hourly slices. And each resource, when we look at the supply stack, what we're buying, we have to think about each resource's ability to provide in each hour. So, for a gas-fired facility, it's very straightforward. They provide the same amount every hour of the day. For solar or wind, it gets a lot more complex. So we have to think about building a resource stack that meets Redwood's needs in every hour with these resources that are variable. With batteries, it's even worse or better, depending on how you think of it, because you have battery generation that can show up. You can put it anywhere you want. It can generate whenever you want, but then you have to optimize your position for that. So we've just added a lot of complexity to the procurement regime and the compliance requirements in order to get to that, additional reliability certainty. Next slide. So, if you look, this is a model that the CAISO did for 2024 using data from the 2022 IPER study. And, under this look, it does appear that there is enough resources within the system to meet load in every hour of the day. However, for every load serving entity to procure perfectly so that they're meeting their own load serving requirement for every hour of the day means that we have, this massive trading system that we need to put in place where one load serving entity has, a little too much in the morning and needs a little bit more in the evening, and they need to find the load serving entity that has the opposite problem and transact, which adds a lot of friction to procurement since we're in a bilateral market. And that just adds to costs. The concern that I have, I think a lot of other market participants who are, dealing with these markets day in and day out have, is that, once a load serving entity gets fully compliant, they're going to be like, okay, great. I'm not going to touch anything. I have a fully compliant position. I'm just walking away. Whereas if they were to, sell RA off of 2 of their resources and buy it RA from another entity off of, 3 of their resources, they could monetize a long position and help out that other load serving entity to help them meet compliance. But that's a very tricky thing to do in a bilateral market. So the concern is that we're going to end up in a position of sort of musical chairs where some of the entities are going to get compliant and other entities are not going to get compliant just because it's too hard to deal with that friction in the procurement market. Do I have another slide? I'm not sure if we okay. So taking a step back to that other chart, can we go back one slide? Sorry. Sorry, one forward. Anyway, I just wanted to wrap up the slice of day. So, when we look at Redwood's position, when we're thinking about, how are we going to procure to this, we're taking, ultimately what's kind of a worst case perspective, which is saying, when is Redwood short? We're going to buy base load power to meet that need, because we know that base load, whether you're short an hour ending 8 or an hour ending 16, we know that base load resources will be able to meet that need. So we're assuming that we aren't going to be able to optimize Redwood's portfolio, RA portfolio any more beyond that, because we really aren't sure if we will be able to optimize it or not. We're hopeful that we could do better than kind of what we have in the modeling right now. But for all of the caveats I gave previously, it's going to be tricky. And, this is something that every load serving entity is mindful of, which means that, base load generation, which is so valuable under slice of day, is getting bid up to a higher premium than we've seen before. So if we go to the next slide now, that kind of leads to kind of what's happening with your cash balance. So, right now we're still working through the details of modeling slice of day RA in Redwood's financial position. But yeah, as I mentioned earlier, staff at both TA and Redwood agreed that it's time to make that modeling change. And so that big drop you see in the cash position at the beginning of 2026 is essentially us saying, that's when your slice of day RA bill comes due. And so this is your net cash, and that's a big impact. Without slice of day, there would still be some impact, but not nearly to the level that you see here. RA under slice of day, it is pretty difficult. And one of the difficulties here is that a large portion of Redwood's portfolio comes from solar resources, particularly Sandrini solar. And solar under traditional RA, you can count it in every month. Maybe you can't count it for a ton, but you can count it for something. Whereas solar under slice of day is only valuable during the middle part of the day. And it's very valuable during the middle part of the day, but you still need to meet, the evening peak or the morning need. And so that's what's driving Redwood's open position in the new slice of day modeling is not those solar hours, but the other hours where the solar resource isn't helpful to Redwood's, to helping Redwood meet its RA compliance in those other hours. So next slide is the last slide, which again is just kind of a zoom in on the 2-year cash projection. You can see that, we would have been doing pretty well, not quite as good as the Feb board, but we're pretty close to it. With, if we were still under kind of this traditional RA paradigm, paying a little bit, paying something for traditional RA, but not, that much. But with this change to slice of day, we're expecting to see a much higher RA bill. And so that's kind of where we're at right now. One thing I would just note for the board is there are still a number of CPUC decisions, at least one that are expected to come out in May, perhaps June, which will help clarify a number of rules about slice of day. We're still kind of, working through some of the implementation details. There's still a lot of tools in play. What requirements are set at could change over the next few months. So there's still a lot of unknowns when it comes to RA slice of day. But we want to be as conservative as we can in the financial modeling. So that's why we want to implement it now. And I know that was a lot. Glad to take questions. This is my last slide.
I'd like to just add, thank you, Jacqueline, for that presentation. Staff asked TEA to give the board an update on slice a day, just in preparation of the draft budget coming before the board next month. So this is, as much as you can retain between now and then, the big changes in revenue projections are going to be based on us deciding to go with the most conservative estimates, and just wanting you to understand a little bit more of kind of the shift in the market and what's leading to that. Another item that we'll be bringing back in May that Jacqueline was covering in this presentation is just the increase in cost, which is that we're going to propose changing our energy risk policy to every so often we update our authorization limits for procurement, and based on the big shifts in costs, we're going to bring back to the board updated limits to allow the risk management team, TEA, to be a little bit more nimble in procurement. Right now, a lot of what we would need to procure, we'd have to go to the board each time, and we only meet once a month. With the scarcity in the market, we would miss out on a lot of opportunities. So this information will be used again in May when we bring it back to you.
Any questions, folks, on that second part of Jacqueline's presentation?
I have a question. So the drop with the slice of day changes, that's how we currently are doing our procurement. Is that correct? You're using the model the way we're currently doing business?
Yeah, so the drop that you see between the kind of without slice of day and the with change to slice of day, that is a change in our modeling because we took out modeling as if Redwood would need to buy traditional RA under the traditional paradigm and switched it to Redwood needing to buy RA under the slice of day paradigm. And the reason why we only did that now versus, last fall when we were also working through slice of days, we didn't have enough details about how slice of day would be implemented to even put that into the financial modeling. And at this point, we do have enough information. It's still a little rough. We know that things are going to change, but it's enough information to be more certain about the cost estimates we have for what Redwood's RA compliance requirement will be, what resources we could use to meet that, and what the cost of those resources will be. Did that answer your question?
We do have time to make changes, so it'll be somewhere between the top number and the bottom number.
Well, Redwood will need to, so some of this is outside of Redwood's hands, right? So this is a change in the compliance regime. And so it's a question of, how is Redwood going to meet that compliance regime? And right now it's just looking like meeting the new compliance regime will be very expensive compared to the traditional compliance regime. There are tools in the toolbox, such as potentially not complying and taking penalties, which traditionally the penalties have been less expensive than actually just buying the RA. So there are a number of load serving entities that have chosen to do that, who've chosen to not buy the RA and just take the penalties. What the penalties will be for 2025 haven't been set yet. So we aren't modeling that kind of approach at this time because we don't know what the penalties will be. That will get set in May or June of this year. But it's kind of, those are the two choices, right? Of either complying with the new slice of day RA regime, or choosing to not comply and receive penalties associated with that non-compliance.
Go ahead, Natalie.
I think to Chris's question though, if we were to, for example, find more battery storage to invest in, contracts with, that kind of thing, that's not so, I don't know, crappy at 7 p.m. Would we be in a better place come 2026 when this kicks off?
Well, so this is going to kick off next year, 2025.
Okay.
So
when the bill is due, I guess.
Oh, well, so the bill is due just because that's when we set the bill to be due, just kind of in the modeling. So that's a modeling choice because we're still working through how to, literally how to set it in Excel so that it shows up in the proper months. This is a very difficult thing to model. So it's taking a lot of steps to get there. But I would say that this is a worst case scenario in that we're saying, okay, what is Redwood's hour where you have the greatest need? And often that's in the middle of the night or the early morning when you don't have the solar online yet, and you don't have any batteries or other resources in your portfolio other than HSC that are generating. And then we're assuming Redwood will buy baseload generation, which is the most expensive resource under slice of day, to meet that need. And that will naturally bring you long in other hours. So there is the potential that in the hours where you're long, we can sell some of those resources and gain back value. There's also the potential where, maybe rather than a baseload generating resource, we can buy RA off of 2 batteries and a wind resource, and those add up to being cheaper than the baseload resource. Honestly, we don't have good pricing for what wind resources are going for or what batteries are going for under slice of day because the market isn't transacting at this time because there's so much regulatory uncertainty that no one is willing to buy these variable resources. They're just buying the baseload resources that they know they're going to need, and kind of holding off on that sort of optimization of the position. There's a lot of uncertainty in the market right now, and there's a lot of regulatory uncertainty that is making Redwood staff's lives really difficult. Our staff, beating their head against the wall trying to get to even an RA position. Right now CPUC's compliance tool for the RA slice of day showing regime has a lot of broken features in it. So we can't even like test out whether Redwood's position under these different procurement scenarios will be compliant or not because the tool is broken. They are working to fix it. The CPUC staff are working really hard on this problem. But it's a very big and difficult regime change to shift from those 12 compliance, 12 compliance requirements to 288.
I appreciate the effort that you have put into this and your presentation. I do kind of feel like this is the sky is falling analysis looking at this. And I would hate to make rash decisions based on that, because I do feel like we do have time to catch up with it. So it's not going to be worst case scenario. That very much is a huge drop.
Yeah, there's.
I will
I was
say,
just gonna.
go ahead, Jacqueline.
Okay, I was just gonna say there are a lot of unknowns. Like, right now we know that the CPUC has already said they're going to change how they're setting the requirement, but they haven't said how. So we don't know like how to model that correctly. We know that the CPUC has said that they're going to fix the template in various ways so that other things change. We don't know how yet. So I hear you that there is a little bit of the sky is falling. That being said, I also don't want to understate that, this regime change in RA compliance really does impact Redwood materially, and I don't think it will get a lot better immediately. It probably will be better than this scenario, but it will not be significantly better, unfortunately. I don't think. I mean, again, we'll see. There are a lot of changes still coming.
Yeah, I just, if once you've seen a few of the risk policy updates or risk updates, they fluctuate wildly from update to update, this from last month, positive millions, and then the next update's negative, and that's been consistent over time because it is just modeling. And I think staff has warned me also not to take this not to say not take it too seriously, but not to change too much in anticipation of this. But we do think that it's significant enough to just give the board an update, and that it's something we'll be considering, as we're budgeting for the next year. And next budget year will be half of 24 and half of 25. So it's even those numbers are not going to look like this, because our fiscal year is over, half of the calendar years that they're modeling.
Yeah, go ahead.
Could you go back one slide, please? 2 slides, please. There, yeah, that one. So it's not necessarily, I was reading this as like, everyone's gonna be looking at the 7 p.m. in the day time frame, but is that really just dependent on when we have the least resource adequacy for our CCA? Or I think I'm not understanding like what's setting that slice of day.
Yeah, so slice of day, you need to be compliant in every hour. So this chart is showing the resource stack in all of California in every hour, to kind of say like, do we have enough resources in every hour to meet the load requirement? And we do, and under traditional RA, you can see it's hour ending 19 that sets the system need, at least in the month of September, and it's very, very tight. The difficulty is that different load serving entities have different resources in their portfolio. So a lot of this base load resources that you see there, kind of like the even green across the whole area, the even brown across the whole area, Those are resources like hydro and gas-fired resources in nuke that are traditionally within the IOUs RA portfolios, right? Like they've had those resources in their portfolios for a very long time. Most CCAs have primarily solar and wind and battery storage. So they have a lot of resources in the middle part of the day, and wind kind of blows in different hours depending on where the wind is located, and batteries are good for 4 hours. But that naturally leads to a lack of supply in the middle of the evening and in the early morning hours once you've deployed those batteries to meet that need in hour ending 19 when the system is kind of peaking. So whereas on a whole, everyone has, there are enough resources to go around, the problem is distributing in a way that every load serving entity will have enough resources in their portfolio to meet their compliance requirement in every hour. That's just a really difficult thing to do in the bilateral market. If I was the captain of the world, I would be saying that slice of day is a great idea, but we need to have kind of an auction clearing mechanism similar to what the CAISO does, so that need can be matched with supply. In a bilateral market, it's just going to be everyone being like, hey, do you have a wind resource that really blows in hour ending 6? Great, I need that. Okay, does anyone have a battery that's good for 2 hours? Okay, I need that, right? And it's a much more difficult market to transact in.
So this might, go ahead, sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Well, so this might be a question and it might just be a 5-hour workshop or something, but I mean, so kind of, just what is the why behind it? Because it seems to me at first on the surface level that obviously to make sure that all load serving entities have enough power so that we're not shutting the grid down, we're not overloading the grid, we're not having brownouts and blackouts. But with what you just said, it really seems to me that also it's making it a lot more expensive and a lot more difficult for basically like CCAs and stuff to operate, because they have that more, the power that we're trying to have, not like the power that we're trying to get away from, like gas and stuff. And so, what's the why behind doing this and changing this procurement method for RA if it's it doesn't seem like it's getting to the goals, and there you go, that's the problem, I guess.
Yeah, no, I would not defend slice of day as it currently exists. I think I think it's something that makes sense, and this has kind of been a problem in the RA policy regime for a really long time, is you have these folks who are very well-meaning and very policy oriented, and they create a system that if you had a perfectly working market, then it creates the right incentives, right? Like the idea is like, oh, let's make sure that we are, covering our load needs in the middle of the night. That's a good idea. But that only works if you have a perfectly operating market. And unfortunately, a lot of the people who are working on policy don't work on the procurement side of the house, and they aren't aware of sort of the market realities of how these resources are transacted. And there is a political unwillingness to centralize the market, because that would mean putting RA within the realm of CAISO jurisdiction, and that would mean the CPUC giving up jurisdiction, which it is unwilling to do, to kind of put it bluntly. So there is a bit of a political power struggle between the CPUC and the CAISO on this, where the CPUC is unwilling to let RA out of its grasp for good reasons, loading order, that sort of thing. And the CAISO kind of just doesn't want to touch it, because they don't want to start a political fight with the CPUC. So you have this, unfortunately, very poorly operating market. And additionally, when slice of day was originally proposed, it was actually proposed for literal slices of the day. So like 6-hour blocks. Like, let's think about the middle of the day when we have a lot of solar. Let's think about the evening. Let's think about the middle of the night, and let's think about the morning peak. So like 4 slices, and that kind of makes a little more sense. And then someone was like, well, but it would be even more reliable if we thought about it on an hourly basis, which is true, but that adds more complexity and adds more cost. But it's very difficult to be the person in the room saying, you know, I want California to be less reliable because I don't want to shell out an extra couple of bucks, right? Like that's a difficult argument to make in the policy world. So you end up in the situation where we have a new regime that unfortunately doesn't really work for the market realities, and will be reliable, but at very high cost.
Thank you for eloquently explaining all that, ideas swimming in my head. Yeah, go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, Jacqueline, the whole CPUC. Damn.
The whole scene.
I just got back from my conference with Cal Cities, all the cities of California, you know, and we talked about this CPUC ad nauseum, mainly because of SB 1999 and fixed rates, and people were furious at that entity. And it makes me think about the obvious solution is a control price of RA, right? I mean, and I guess that's the question for you. Do we have price controls for RA? Or is it just like, it's a free market, let the market decide how bad the CCAs are gonna get destroyed by this kind of pricing scheme? Is there anything?
It's definitely the latter. I mean, you know, the CPUC has made it very clear for entities that have not met compliance and have said, wait, you know, we couldn't find RA at a reasonable cost, so we didn't buy it. The CPUC is like, well, but you could have bought it at a ridiculously high price, so you're at fault for not complying. Here's your penalty. So, you know, that sort of signal from the CPUC combined with their ruling last summer that if you are short RA, you can't expand your service territory, which you know, isn't necessarily an impact to Humboldt, but is an impact to a number of other CCAs, has created more of a feeding frenzy in the market, where, you know, essentially, you know, if the CPUC were to come out tomorrow and say that, you know, we're raising the penalties by $20, I would be like, well, okay. And then the day after, the RA market is going to trade at $22 above what it was trading at the day before. Because, you know, now you set the penalty higher. Okay, now everyone's just going to price up higher. So it's not a functioning market, and there are no price controls.
It reminds me of Enron, like the CCAs can't survive in this kind of market. That's the bottom line. That's what we're talking about. So we have to figure out how to deal with the CPUC. Like, how do we reform that organization? That's the only solution to this nonsense.
You got it.
And one thing I do want to say is, like, all staff that I've met at the CPUC, I think they're working hard at a very thankless job. You know, I feel for the people who are building the compliance tool for Slice of Day. They were told to build this tool that can optimize a whole bunch of different numbers and build it in Excel. And they are straining Excel to like the limit of what it can do, because Excel really shouldn't be asked to do this task. But they've been asked to do that, and they're trying their best to do it. You know, so I don't want to put any heat on CPUC staff. You know, I think it's higher up the food chain there.
No, and the public advocate at CPUC is great, but they're like our one voice. Is that one group, the public advocate's office, that does anything for the consumer, for our constituents, and that's it. And the rest of them just run roughshod over that particular entity. We just got to figure that out.
All right, yeah, go ahead, Emma.
Well, that's a good segue to, like, you mentioned that, you know, this is still being fleshed out by the CPUC. Is there an advocacy opportunity that Cal CCA is engaged in? Like, what has that looked like, or is there still an opportunity to, you know, make our tiny voices heard?
Yeah, I mean, I think Cal CCA is doing their best to advocate. I actually talked to some Cal CCA staff, Eric Little, who runs policy and regulatory advocacy at Cal CCA at the Cal CCA conference last week. You know, right now, I think kind of the big message that Cal CCA is trying to get across is like, look, we still don't have a functioning tool that shows us what our positions are. We still don't really know what our requirements are going to be because you've told us that, you know, you're changing things mid-stride. You know, we probably aren't going to have certainty on any of those things until July, and then filing is due in October, which is not a long time to procure. So CalCCA is trying to, at the very least, have slice of day delayed for another year to push out, you know, having to start until 2026. You know, Eric seemed optimistic about that. You know, I'm hopeful as well. You know, but my job is to not plan for the positive case, but to plan for kind of the worst case scenario and try to figure out that. So that's something that Redwood staff and TA staff have been working on, of like, you know, what can we buy now that we know will be valuable and useful for Redwood's portfolio, whether slice of day does in fact go through for 2025 or whether it gets delayed. You know, my personal opinion, having seen these sort of fights on the regulatory sphere in the past, is that if CalCCA pushes hard to get a delay, the investor-owned utilities will say, you know, no, we've been structuring our portfolios to have slice of day go through. You can't change at the last minute and delay, you know, an extra year. And, you know, they will say that in part because their positions are really good under slice of day.
Yeah. All right. That makes us all feel really good. I don't know, no.
This is why I stayed down in the Bay Area. I didn't want to go up to Redwood and just our bad news.
So you can see how we're all super. All right, any other questions for Jacqueline? I know Chris does have to leave at 5:30, so I'm gonna keep us moving on. Do we have any other questions though before we say thank you to Jacqueline?
No,
All right.
I would comment, but it's getting late and it's not gonna solve anything.
Yeah, exactly. We can all talk about how, yeah, upset we are about it, what reforms are needed and all that, but yeah. All right, I'll open it up to public comment. Not seeing anybody here in the room. Do we have anybody on? Oh, we have Richard.
I just wanted to throw out a couple of quick things.
You don't even need the public comment. You can just add in.
I just wanted to respond really quickly to a couple of things that were said by board members. Director Arroyo basically was asking, can we procure our way out of this? And I think timing is the issue there, because we found, you know, just doing a solicitation, getting the offers, evaluating them, and then the time it takes to actually build the thing after that. It would, I think anything new that we could do now in the way of procurement of newly built stuff. And also there's going to be a feeding frenzy, as Jacqueline was saying. So we'd be, you know, it's again creating the seller's market, which is something we've been fighting for years now. And then just about Chair Schaefer's comment about, you know, why are we doing this whole slice of day thing? I think, you know, we do need to recognize that it's harder to match load to supply in a grid where we're really converting to these intermittent renewable resources, and that is a reality. And, you know, if you look, I mean, we played a game at the CalCCA conference last year where they had us all like form teams and procure to meet, you know, it was kind of a playing to build the grid game. And we found ourselves procuring the dirtier resources, because if you're trying to get reliability and you're trying to have it be affordable, those natural gas resources start to look good, those baseload things. So, you know, I don't want to totally just blame CPC for getting everything wrong. They are trying to find a way to make the new grid work to supply loads that, you know, we can't just force the loads to be a certain shape. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Do we have any commenters online? All right. Well, thank you, Jacqueline, and hopefully next time we see you, the forecast will be a little bit better.
Certainly
You know,
hope
it
so.
likes to change on us. Thank you. All right, so we have no new CCE business, so that'll take us into our regular old business, which is item 8.1. Executive director salary and job description. So we have a staff report.
Yeah, I'm gonna, Chris Mosquito, our HR manager, present that.
Thank you, Chris.
I have everything written down first, so this is gonna go fast. I have a whole script for you. Hi, I'm Christy. I'm RCEA's HR manager. You will probably recall last month, the board approved the creation of an ad hoc subcommittee to help us with selection criteria for the ED recruitment. And one little point that they had was to take a look at the ED salary with us. So I want to present a summary of what we talked about. Do I have slides? No, okay, fine, I'll do it without slides. That's fine, fine. It is, yes, it's a very detailed staff report. I want to start kind of at the beginning with you. So in preparation of the 23-24 budget, and per a board approved compensation policy, we did what we call a salary survey, which in the board approved policy sets out 10 CCAs and local organizations to establish a labor market for us to compare salaries with. We do that every 2 years, and the policy spells out exactly how we should go about doing that. So we collected all of our data, we crunched all of our numbers, and we found that there were salary differences between RCEA and our labor market agencies. The largest of those were at the director level, which was 24% below the labor market, and the ED, which was 38% below the labor market. But it's our past practice to kind of remove the ED classification from that. So when we removed that, the average difference across all salaries was 12%. And the board was very nice in approving a 14% increase for everybody, and that included the ED. Once we made that 4% increase, the directors in the ED were still below the labor market, 14% for directors and 24% for the ED. But we did bring all of the other classifications up to being equal, which was very nice. So in that original salary survey that we did first in preparation of 7-1, we looked at the ED across 7 of the 10 approved labor agencies. A few months later, in September, the board saw another proposal to raise the ED salary again. In that proposal, the information on salary survey existed, but it had been pared down a little bit. So it went from 7 labor market agencies to 5 labor market agencies. And of these 5, the local agencies that we had used for comparisons had been taken off. When we're preparing the salary survey, we use local agencies as what we believe is an important salary balancing factor, because the other CCAs are in very affluent areas. They have very large budgets and a lot more customers than we have. So it makes it a little bit difficult to compare apples to apples. So while the jobs may not be exactly the same, we use those local salaries to compare cost of living in this area and kind of balance those higher salaries with what high executives in this area are getting. Another thing that we keep in mind when we're doing the salary survey is the other CCAs have C-suite setups, and the CEOs, the COOs, the CFOs usually negotiate their salaries, and they have a very large range that they can negotiate from. So a little bit difficult for us to compare our set salary schedule with kind of unlimited negotiating power. Okay, so when the board looked at the 5 agencies in the September ED update, it showed that the salary difference between the labor market in those 5 agencies and us was 47%. And if you'll remember from a couple seconds ago, our 7-3 comparison showed 24. Based on that 47% difference from the 5 labor agencies, the ED salary was increased by 47%, and that was on top of the 14% already approved. What resulted was an internal RCEA salary difference between the directors and the ED of 89%. So the ED was making 89% more per year than a director level employee. And prior to that change, it was a 30% difference. So that increase was very, very large. We took a look at our local market agencies, and we're judging anywhere from a 10 to a 40% salary difference from the C-suite to the next director level positions.
Yeah, you have your slides.
Oh, there. I think we have some more.
But this is actually helpful. This is the one you want to see. So I just wanted to show for those who are visual, I'm more visual as well. These are the two market agency comparisons. The top one being the 7 agencies that we chose to look at for 7-1. And then again, the 5 agencies that were shown to you on 9/28 for that second increase, as well as the average midpoint. So you can see there was quite a bit of a jump. Well, we lost that balancing aspect from the local agencies. So we took all of this to the subcommittee and we brought them 4 proposals that we thought made sense for a potential revision. The first 2 are kind of the common sense one as far as I consider them, which is to go back to 7-1 or stay where we're at. The other 2 we thought were a good balance. So the first one would be to take a look at the ED salary, recognize that there's a 24% difference, and try to cut into that by raising salary 10%, so that there would be a 14% difference between labor agencies. The second one was to say, hey, they're 24% below, let's raise them 24% and bring them even with our labor market agencies. And then we're showing internal comparisons just so that you can see sort of the internal equity changes that would be made by those 4 proposals. So the subcommittee decided that they wanted a little bit of a hybrid. The first thing that they thought would be a good idea would be to establish a salary range. And we would like to remove the ED salary from the RCEA employee schedule and establish a separate ED salary schedule. Step 1 of that ED salary schedule would represent a 10% increase from the 7-1 step 1 salary. And it would increase by 2.5% each step until this top step was approximately 50% higher than the top step of the director. And so for ease of use, we have translated that into what we use now for our salary steps. So you end up with a salary schedule that has 13 steps that are 2.5% apart. This gives the board a little bit more leeway in negotiating salary for a new contract DOE. It also makes it a little bit easier for you when it's time for merit increases or to increase that salary to look at a range and make a determination based on that. And of course, the salary range could be increased as the board sees fit, or if you would like, because it's going to be a separate component, anything that we do on a salary survey going forward could be extended into this salary range as well. And so we are asking for you to approve us taking the ED off of the RCEA staff salary schedule, establishing a range for the new ED salary schedule. And then it was requested that we take a look at the ED job description. So we've made some initial changes. We're asking you to approve those. And then what we plan to do is take that updated JD to our recruitment firm and see if they can't help us dial him a little bit.
Thank you, Christy.
I was just gonna share, we didn't have all subcommittee members present, and it wasn't a unanimous proposal to bring to the board. And the subcommittee really felt like this was a decision to bring before the whole board, but this was one recommendation that they would like you to consider. So hope I captured that correctly. And the job description as written was before we were a CCA and before the deputy ED position was created. And so there were quite a few things that needed a little tweaking that we thought we could take care of at this time.
Yeah, and just to add, I think, and you touched on this a bit, Christy, but I do like the idea of having a schedule with steps set up like this, because I know we originally talked about that idea of our subcommittee talked about the idea of negotiating like you would see like, yeah, in a CEO, COO kind of situation that is being run, but after kind of tapping into some of Nancy's wisdom of seeing this board for a long time and just mulling it over, but I think this is good in the sense too that a lot of us as electeds are not here for very long or are not on boards for a really long time, and it does really set up something that exists and is solid for when new board members come in and have to, like Christy said, make decisions about merit-based raises or, even just to be able to follow along with that. And the idea too, to increase the steps, I think was kind of what the subcommittee was hoping to create a wider salary schedule or salary range just to attract, better candidates and to also, maintain longevity in a position to see like, oh, well, as I move up these steps, I can make X amount of money over time. And I think that could also incentivize staying at an agency for an executive director too. So that just kind of sums up some of the thoughts that our subcommittee was having and some of the conversations I had with staff. But is there anything else that members of the subcommittee would want to add before we kind of open it up for questions and discussion?
I'd like to commend staff for pulling all this together in
Yes.
such a short time. There's a lot of work that you put together.
Yeah, it was.
Thanks to Christy.
I'm sure you had voice in it too. Yeah, thank you though.
Yeah, go ahead, Natalie.
I think that was a great characterization, and you did a really good job, taking our, diverse input and putting it into something that, we can bring forward. I do really think there's a benefit to having a separate salary schedule, but still having that clearly defined range and steps. Adds a little more structure while still giving it, kind of allowing the board some discretion around evaluating that somewhat separately from other positions. It seems like a good happy medium to me. And so this was the direction that I was, hoping we would, broadly speaking, go. I lost my second idea, so that's okay. Anyway, great job. And I just, I think this is, gets us, headed in the right direction. Oh, it was that, really, something I didn't realize before we discussed this in our subcommittee was that, for recruitment firms, part of their fee is associated with the salary range, and so you do kind of need to define that to help get that process started. So to receive qualified proposals from recruitment firms, like this step needed to happen, so that's part of why there's a bit of a rush on it.
Yeah, that's a good point too. And because they, take whatever their fee is based off of what job they're hiring and how much it gets paid. And so if we don't know what that is, or we start it way too low, we might not even find a good firm to be able to work with. So, all right. Any questions, comments, concerns? Yeah, go ahead, Nick.
Couple questions. How many of the board, maybe by a show of hands, this thing seemed to kick off around July of 2023, kind of where this thing kind of started to dramatically change on this direct ED salary range. How many were on this board for that time? Pretty much everybody else here was on the board. So we've been through this whole adventure together and understand, I think, what's gone on through this process. And now that the process is changing, one of the things that I understand with the ad hoc committee is redefining the role of executive director. Or some of the, I've read through this, but it's a lot of are the responsibilities of the ED changed significantly with this. We have an assistant ED that was hired to relieve the as much stuff that was on the original ED was overwhelmed. And so we hired an assistant ED to take pressure off of him so that we could make this place flow better. And is that because I don't see the total direction of what our assistant ED is doing. Is that done in this job description to take that pressure away from the ED being doing too much and allowing the second person to augment the procedure to
That
not
was-
have this over.
That was the impression I got when I.
I'm presenting this right. Go ahead. I don't-
Yeah, no, that was the impression I got when I read through this. We were just redefining and clarifying what we need that position to do and separating out what the executive director is doing or the deputy executive director is doing. So we fine tuned those things.
Yeah, and I think what it really does too is like. Because of a lot of conversations, and there just wasn't very much in it. It wasn't a very robust job description to begin with, but to really. Drive in on these points of kind of the ED as the. The cheerleader basically, and the one that is both, making this vision happen and then specifying that vision a lot more. Clearly within here, like, we added probably about 5 different bullet points in there to really take specifically what we're doing and make it part of the job description to really like. Just make it very clear that like these are the intended duties and define those, but go ahead, Natalie, I saw you had your hand up.
I think that the updates to the job description from my reading weren't, really substantively different, but added in, like you're saying, more of what we currently do. That it's an organization that's larger than it was when this was previously developed. And otherwise including some of the division of duties that you all kind of talked about before I was on the board, before a lot of us were on the board. And you worked with facilitator Mary Jelinas in the past to define the role of the deputy along with the ED a little bit more clearly. So we talked about in our subcommittee, we didn't really want to reinvent that work just because some of us were new to the board, that process had been undertaken by the board just a couple years ago, right? Just,
That was done at the staff level.
oh, okay. So that was done at the staff level, I apologize, but that had been done internally, when Eileen came on, or before Eileen came on, essentially, to help define that better, so we didn't wanna, kind of reinvent that wheel after essentially the agency invested in that process, with a facilitator, so anyway, just, I don't see this as radically redefining the role of the executive director as much as making it clear and codifying what has been happening in the division of duties, which is one thing we were concerned about as a committee, is like, is there clarity about the division of duties moving forward, especially as we're recruiting for this position?
Well, it changes it, and I'm not saying you're wrong in what you did, I don't want to end up back here doing this again, okay? Because I'll tell you what. This isn't probably the right way to word it, but this organization can't resolve it, can't endure this kind of crap. That we've gone through, and this board, myself included, is probably at fault for some of that. But there's a $50,000 change in the salary. It was brought up after the salary was increased by $100,000. It was brought before the board in a public meeting that really wasn't the way to go. And then some of these numbers that have been presented to us, I didn't totally understand all the percentages. But that was, if I read the presentation correctly, it was a little excessive. And I know what went on in closed session, and that's not what I'm trying to discuss here. We know why we did and the way we formed with the organization that we had and how it was going about, how it was gonna be effective. And at the end of the day, here we are. And this is still not a simple process to make this work correctly, but I would really hope that as a board and a subcommittee, and I commend the job you're doing, that staff has brought this together in a short period of time, that we can get this resolved. The number seems in line, better than 300,000 to be at the 245,000. I'd just like to see us get this resolved. So I'm not gonna keep pounding on the drum, but
Well, I just wanted to add to that, like, this is really a jumping off point to work with the recruiter, so they have something to go with, and that is part of, what most recruiters will do is help you refine that job description to make it seem enticing and kind of align with other similar, job descriptions that they're seeing out in the market. And then also we talked about as a subcommittee, wanting to do, you know, a class and comp and look at all of our salaries and look at our job descriptions and look at really how the organization has changed over time, because you've been on this board longer probably than I think any of us, Frank, and sure,
Sure,
but
sure.
you know, seeing how the organization fundamentally has changed over time, and that, you know, the jobs that the directors and staff are doing are probably fundamentally different in a lot of senses. And so, but that process, you know, would take 6 months to a year or even more. And so, you know, we don't really have the nimble ability to do it right now before hiring somebody, but going forward would be something that I think folks were interested in, just to kind of update RCEA organizationally as well. But go ahead.
And we didn't wanna ignore the comments that were brought forward that were very valid in the September meeting, that not every position at every agency matches exactly. I mean, we tried to do our best looking at job descriptions to match them, and so that's the intent down the road, to do a full class and comp study and decided if the policy needs to be updated, you know, that kind of got us where we're at here. So I will say, what we presented is what we thought was a great middle ground for the board to approve, knowing that there's, you know, this is a complex issue that we may need to have an outside consultant help, you know, a neutral third party help with in the future. But we're not. You might see this again, but not with, you know, just an added recommendation from an outside consultant down the road.
Yeah, I hope we're not overhauling it again. Yeah, it's 6 months or
I like your phrase, it's a stepping place or a starting place to do this. I would like to see a definite delineation of between the assistant director and a director, so that they're not overlapping in their things. I mean, the ED has to be the ultimate, I guess the buck stops there, or the board, the buck stops there at the top of that. But, you know, the day-to-day function, the ED is one responsible. But that those job definitions would be able to do their own perspective, what they're supposed to be doing, and not overlap and not create confusion, and bring, and still maintain the staff which we have, which is a complicated staff. There's no, this is a hard, like for recruiting, that's gonna be fun to find a recruiter that goes out and finds people that do this complicated business. If you just got through talking about RA, I mean, there's this, I don't want to divert too far, but there's an entity out there that's got 3 initials in its name. And they would very much like to destroy CCE, I believe, altogether. That's my personal opinion. Mr. Bowers talked about. And they're bigger than we are. They're really big. And so if we want to survive this and do this for our county and move ourselves forward, we've got to be wise in how we at least manage our internal structure. And so I'll just leave it at that. But I thank the subcommittee and staff for the job that they've done here, and starting us on the right direction.
I think now that has been added, I'm sure, and that's good. Sorry, Skip, you're behind the pole too. That's right.
Yeah, I tried a couple of times.
You can go first. You go first, Skip.
Okay.
Bam, 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 and then we'll come over here.
Some things that would help me with this. I agree that we should pull away the ED from the schedule. I would advocate absolving any connection between the ED and a director level. This 13-step schedule won't appear on the regular schedule we have now. Well,
It will not, it will exist as a separate document.
I think that's good. And then, as I understand it, and a question is, why not 7 steps for 13 steps and or 0. Just negotiate annually. And I understand because of the change in directors, 0. I think Sarah said 0 maybe is not a good idea. And 13 was to promote longevity.
So it's a very simple explanation for 13 is to maintain the difference between steps that we use for the normal schedule. So right now, all employees have 10 steps and they're 2.5%. And so when we were given direction to discover this range between the 10% up to the 50, I built in 2.5% because that's our normal procedure. It could be 7, it could be condensed into 5. It just depends on how much percentage in between steps the board would like to establish on this salary schedule. So right now you're looking at 2.5%. We could condense them into 7 that are 5%. We could squeeze them down into 4 that are whatever percent. It's really preference of the board as far as how that is set up.
I'm sure the committee has gone over this, but those were just some thoughts. And I think it's important as much as we can to talk about ED and compensation as an island and try not to connect to other positions. Now,
I agree with you, Skip, and I think that's why the recommendation to pull it out separately existed, and I'll just. Christy did a great job with what we gave her, because we were like, how about this range? I mean, it wasn't as capricious as that, but it was a little bit, we just weren't all in exact agreement, so we ended up with something that was as close as possible, and then you created a structure from that, so thank you. And, you know, and ultimately, if folks want to change this, that's perfectly reasonable and why we're talking about it all together. But I also want to note that, you know, you were very diplomatic. Everyone's been very diplomatic about like the heartburn that articulating a methodology that was not used consistently caused. And this is an effort to kind of dial that back while also saying, yeah, we do want to treat this differently. We want to have the leeway to treat this differently, especially as we're going through like an uncharted recruitment process, but still acknowledging that it created some difficulty to have done things the way we did it, you know, last fall. So trying to kind of learn from that and incorporate those lessons learned into the plan moving forward. And I would agree with you, Frank, that I don't, you know, hope we get this right. And we're a little bit in a new space together, doing this recruitment, and, you know, we're aiming to learn from everything we've experienced.
Well, I think
Sure.
your board is, sorry to interrupt you. The board has a heart to make this work. And I can't see anybody in here that doesn't want this to work as an entity. And so the effort that's being put forward to get it right, I think is invaluable. Thank you for your comment.
Yeah, that's basically where I was coming to, but I'm not sure who was on the subcommittee. I can't remember, but thank you guys.
Chris, via email.
Yeah, I just, basically had to check out of that. I just like couldn't hear it. So, yeah, when we go back to what happened in July, there was a lot of, I think one of the things, now that I look back on it, that we as a board could is we have job descriptions, but there's actual people in those job descriptions. And I think because we are human beings and we live in a small community, we all know each other, that we kind of confuse the job description with the human beings, and I'm including staff as well. So when I understand, and I definitely heard in July, that staff were upset over the differential that they felt that they were at versus what the ED should be at. And I heard that, but it can go both ways too. I mean, maybe some staff aren't really what they should be at their job description. Maybe that's why their salary is what it's at. So, I mean, I'm totally on board with what you guys did and this kind of, you know, hybrid thing of trying to, it seemed to me like we're trying to get more parity or, if that's the right word, between the staff, the deputy ED and the ED. That was one of the things that we came to, is that right? Is that why we went back from the 7-1,
Yes.
yeah.
It feels right, and,
Yeah.
you know, we all work at cities, and we all know how much our our city managers make, and our department heads and stuff, and just seeing what other executives in Humboldt County makes, and looking at those comps, I mean, that's really where I'm coming from. And then also, I mean, just to add to, like, we are a public agency, and employees do, you know, like, people have the rights to know what they're, you know, what people are making in their agency, and it is hard to see that differential between a director and, you know, and an ED. I just did it because I was signing my contract for next year and got to look at what I get to make as a, you know, a principal versus what our superintendent makes even, and just like, okay, you know, we've all probably been in those shoes. And I mean, just to, you know, really define what people's jobs are clearly and compensate them in a way that, you know, are for those job duties and, you know, comparable to other similar agencies, I think was just really where we were coming from, and try to, you know, make it as fair and equitable as possible.
So, but there were two clear, is that true? So trying to set the ED salary, so we're trying to do that, but we're also trying to get this kind of parity between ED and staff. Is that what we're trying to do?
You know, it was presented that way because everything is not apples to apples. And so it was just to show what a huge swing the internal equity went with the September increase. And so Chris, I felt bad having just like given you the documents without being at the meeting. It was, there was no intent in presenting it with the next step down as a, you know, intent to change any other salaries, or it's just that the swing went really far within internal equity. And so I agree, and that's kind of to the point of the class and comps study, that every position isn't necessarily equal to, and I don't know if we should be comparing the two, but without that more detailed information where we're looking at cost of living, customers you're serving, you know, a lot of the CCAs that we're comparing to started as CCAs, and we started as a JPA, you know, doing programs, and our internal culture has been much different. They've modeled off of the IOUs and the C-suites, and RCA has historically verbally said, we don't want to be CEO, COO. We want to have more of that public agency, you know, culture of of our beginnings. And so, you know, I'm not, that's the history. I don't want to assume that's how the board wants to continue, but that range to compare to those C-suites, to those organizations that are modeling more off of the IOUs, didn't seem in line with RCA's kind of internal culture and equity. So I think that's where the rub probably, you know.
I guess my other question to the subcommittee would be, so given if, you know, we have whatever, I don't know how many steps, 13, whatever, but I get where you got that. That's fine, that's cool. Is that numerical range covering it enough so that when we go out to, you you know, we're gonna go out, we're gonna hire a new ED. And we all recognize that this is a very, you know, technical position. Are we going to get, are we gonna get candidates? I mean, I'm gonna throw that out because I don't know what the numbers
That's what
are.
we're relying on the recruitment company to help us with, to tell us if we're within the correct range to get good.
I don't know.
Okay, okay.
And that's like why to hire a recruiter. We could just say, okay, Eileen, here's the job description, apply it, put it on
Gotcha.
Craigslist, right? Like,
Okay.
no. So we're gonna hire a real professional that's gonna tell us if this is it or that, but again, as we said, a jumping off point to,
To get it.
I mean, I imagine if they really say, this isn't gonna work, we need to radically change it, we'll come back to the board.
And I mean, it's say it's
Yeah.
flown for 30 days and we get no applicants that are, you know, that the board deems qualified, then we
Then
could,
that's a signal.
yeah.
There were questions on this side though, weren't there? I saw a hand that was behind this poll.
As a subcommittee, member, I just wanted to share, some thoughts. I'm kind of with Frank on a lot of what you said. As a new member of the board in July and September, I was just blindsided. I had no idea what we were talking about, to be honest. And obviously there's history that I was unaware of. And so, you know, to the point of longevity with the board and qualifications and what we're tasked with deciding and direction, and, you know, creating direction. I think the way to go absolutely is with a third-party professional outside agency or professional. I don't feel like I'm qualified to make a lot of the decisions that we're asked to make on a staffing level. And so to have somebody come in and to be doing the class, I'm personally an advocate for that. Because I feel that through this process we've just gone through, we realized something was really broken. And I want to make sure that we fix it before we go forward. So, so I'm strongly advocating for a hard look at the job descriptions and the revamp, whatever needs to get revamped, and to have somebody who does that for a living come in and take a look and help us out. So, you know, all of it, absolutely all of it, with the goal of being successful going forward and having the next ED we hire be the right one for a long time. And everybody else to be happy and stay that way and have the appropriate avenues for communication and feedback so that we, you know, continue to grow and improve as an agency internally. And, you know, because the board, we just aren't in a position to be managing that, right? I mean, staff evaluations are hard, you know, if we don't have a vehicle in place to make sure everything's balanced and communication is flowing in all the right directions all the time, you know, it's still broken. So, so my goal is to make sure that we fix everything that isn't working. Or has it worked?
Thank you, Liz. Scott, did you have something or no? It was Elise. Okay. Yeah, Natalie.
And I think, you know, I'll just highlight when we talked about in our subcommittee about the idea of a class and comp study, a full class and comp study, would be probably very valuable and would also take quite a bit of time, and sort of recognizing the place we're at where we have a very capable deputy, but would like to, you know, take some work off the plate by hiring an ED, that those things were kind of in misalignment, that, you know, going through and I mean, I'm interested in what other people think, like, based on a class and comp study being a multi-month endeavor before we would even start the recruitment process, is that, you know, something we want to do now? I mean, I think staff have brought us direction based on the general gist of our subcommittee recommendation, which was to move forward with this, with the updates that could be made based on, you know, the last couple of years of incorporating a deputy and figuring out what those roles were and all of that. But it is still a, you know, a question for everyone. And ultimately, I think that, you know, when we gave the increases throughout the organization in July, then came back a couple months later with a modified version of that same methodology that removed two of the comps that were the lowest paid. That didn't sit well with people to be using a version of the same rationale, but that was not the same. And so I think, you know, frankly, the range is intended to like dial it back a little while still giving us a range of flexibility, knowing that we're entering kind of an unknown process and don't know, you know, I think we'll get that feedback from the recruitment firms and from the candidates about whether this is the right range for this type of position. So it was an effort to kind of true up all of those things while still moving forward. And if we were to undertake a full class and comp study, that would probably benefit the organization, but and we can also be doing that and then, you know, make adjustments accordingly. But frankly, I think we're in the position where am I reading it correctly to say that staff would like us to like start this recruitment process?
Absolutely, and I also think it's easier to dial the salary up than advertise at a higher salary and then based on the candidates, you don't go down.
Right, right. And just to add to that, I mean, that hiring an ED can help do all those things that Natalie just said too, like by having somebody in the ED position that hopefully can bring new energy, new knowledge, new expertise in, you know, managing an organization like this. And so that would be the hope too, that having somebody at that helm will be pointing our compass that way.
And staff were like, hey, using that methodology but modified is weird. And I think we got that feedback and it was awkward and you know, everybody like was there to hear it. But at this point, like, you know, removing the salary range from the schedule just like makes it our decision forward. So I think that's a really wise one.
So, on number 2, adopt an ED salary schedule, that's this one, but that schedule is going to be reviewed by the, recruitment, firm that we're gonna hire, right? Is that my understanding, right?
We're gonna present it to them and we'll get feedback.
Okay.
And so if the feedback is, I'm not gonna be able to find anyone for you, we would come back to the board.
Right, but you want it to be finalized. You don't want it tentative coming back. You want the recruiter to say, okay, I'll see what I can do. That was.
Okay.
Like if you want.
Well, if that's the case, I'm willing to make those motions.
We need to go out to the public.
Oh, sorry.
Go to the public and then. Okay, let's go to the public and then we can come back for last minute questions. Anybody in the room? Anybody online? Okay, we did it officially.
Okay.
Any final wrap ups and then, yeah, sure, if you'd like to make a motion, you can make that.
I know I made my plea for doing XYZ, but I wasn't intending that it would be done before the recruitment process, but possibly in tandem with the recruitment process. You know, so we're all, you know, whatever.
Okay, ready? Okay, I'll make the motion to adopt RCA staff salary schedule with the removal of the ED classification. Adopt an ED salary schedule and approve the initial ED salary range. And to approve the updated ED job description. Thank you also, subcommittee and staff. That was hard. Thank you.
And I will second that.
Okay, so we have a motion from Director Wu and a second from Director Sempani. All in favor, we're gonna do a show of hand vote. Aye.
Unanimous motion passed.
Aye. Thank you, folks, and thank you to the rest of the lovely subcommittee and the staff for working on this. We really appreciate it. All right, we're moving right along. Chris, we're in new business one. Here in a second. Okay, so we have item 9.1, Foster Clean Power V purchase agreement. Richard Engel is here.
Great, thank you. And I have just a couple of slides for you. Thank you. So as long-term power procurement goes, this is pretty straightforward. We're basically asking you to double down on something the board already approved back in 2022, and which we think has turned out to be a good decision. So this is the Foster Clean Power V solar plus storage power procurement. agreement. So this is the second phase of a project just off of Foster Avenue, just outside of Arcata city limits. This new project would be a 4 megawatt solar photovoltaic generator paired with 1.25 megawatts, 4-hour battery energy storage system, so it can store a total of 5 megawatt hours of energy. The developers, Renewable America, the board back in 2022 already signed off on us getting into an agreement for the Foster A project. If you look at the map there, you can see the Foster A is more on the south side and butts right up against Foster Avenue, which is the part that runs right along there. If you're familiar with Eddie Tanner's deep-seated farm, that's kind of right over here, just to the east of what would be the Foster B project. This did already get its conditional use permit a couple of years ago from the county, and Jocelyn, Glenn, and I both listened in on that hearing they had for the approval of both of these projects, and it really went off without a hitch. There isn't any public opposition we've heard of to this project. Again, it's like the previous one, a 20-year power purchase agreement. They say they can get the project online as soon as September, but built into the contract is that they have to get it online by December of this year. They start having penalties if they don't make that. There's some nice environmental aspects to the project. They're making a pollinator habitat be incorporated in the project, like a lot of new solar projects are doing these days. And they've also come up with a way of installing the solar racks that basically just involve driving piles into the grounds. They're not putting like a lot of concrete in the ground that, you know, it'd be hard to remediate in the future if some other use other than solar is determined to be a better use of this land in the future. And just here's a set of milestones that are built into the contract. They've already got the site control taken care of. They've got their interconnection agreement. They have the conditional use permit, as I mentioned. They're working on their equipment procurement right now, and they expect to break ground in July. There is one kind of thing that we don't always have in contracts here, which is at the bottom, you see that RA guarantee date. This project, we hope will include the resource adequacy that will help us towards what we spent a lot of time talking with Jacqueline about this afternoon. We found as we're currently still trying to work through on the airport microgrid, that it can be really tricky for these kind of smaller scale projects to get that resource adequacy. There's not really a clear, easy pathway for doing that. That's guaranteed to work. So what we built into this contract is we would like to be able to get deliverability, meaning that RA by next year, by 2025, so that we can count this towards our midterm reliability compliance with the CPUC in the tranche that we have to have lined up for 2025. In the event that they don't get it by 2026, then we would be paying them a lower price for the product. To reflect not getting that resource adequacy that we're expecting to get from the project. So that's just a little bit of insurance we get if the project doesn't give us as much value as we're hoping it does in the ideal case that's built into the contract. And let's see, was there anything else? I think that's really it. So the original project was 3 megawatts, and this one adds 4 megawatts for a total of 7 megawatts of solar generation. Happy to take any questions you have.
Wonderful. Any questions for Richard on that?
Richard, real quick on the 1.25/5. Can you explain that to me?
Sure. So 1.25 is the capacity of megawatts that it can discharge power to the grid, and it has enough capacity in it to do that for 4 straight hours. So if you multiply the 1.25 megawatts times the 4 hours, you get 5 megawatt hours. So that's the volume of energy that's held in the tank, basically in the battery, and it can discharge at a rate of 1.25 megawatts.
I noticed on the chart, it was interesting to see that batteries slowly decay over what, the 20-year lifespan?
Yeah.
It's interesting.
And that's pretty much, you see that in any energy contract storage. The one way around that is sometimes developers will have an agreement they're going to augment it by adding new batteries on as the old ones decay away so that you have a more constant, capacity over time, so. You know, but there's a cost to do that, of course.
Yeah.
You know, in some cases, it just makes more sense to let the capacity fade away over time. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, on the R8 side of it, we have first rights to first shot at getting down and. I mean, if
Yes, yeah, they-
R8 goes so elaborately high, are they gonna be? Would they have the option to go?
No,
sell off to
it's,
someone else?
we're guaranteed the RA if they do get the
And
RA.
the same with the Rex.
Yes, yeah, definitely get the Rex.
I saw the one, I see they still have the incentives in here, for tax incentives, was the seller's right, but I didn't see where it mentioned the Rex. So
Yeah, no, the Rex in the contract, the Rex are part of what they're giving us.
that's all I have.
I'll take it out to public comment, not seeing anybody in the room. Do we have anybody on? All right, well, I'll bring it back to the board for any final thoughts or a motion.
The approval of the resolution.
Second. We have a motion by Roy, a second by Wu. All in favor, show of hands, aye. Unanimous, thank you, folks.
Where are all the people that want us to do more solar?
They're just letting us do our thing. All right, that takes us to 9.2, energy resilient fire services and high threat communities grant.
Okay.
For the staff report.
Yeah, this will be brief. It's good news. In December, we were awarded a $3 million grant by the California Office of Planning and Research to construct resilient energy systems. So this is solar plus battery at fire stations that serve high fire risk areas in rural, remote communities in Humboldt County. And so the goals of this are twofold. One is in non-emergency blue sky events. This will reduce energy costs to these rural fire stations and you know, reduce their bills because it'll reduce their consumption during peak energy use. And then secondly, when they are under emergency situation, they will have the battery backups to remain online. A lot of these rural fire stations are critical facilities for, you know, charging stations for the community, emergency communications. And so it's important that we keep them energized as long as possible during these emergency events, which our area is seeing more and more of. So what we're bringing to you today, and so we have a map that was attached to the participation agreement. I'll just kind of briefly go through. We have 16 fire stations. They include Yurok Tribal Fire Department, the Hoopa Valley Tribal Fire Department, Karuk Department of Natural Resources, Blue Lake Volunteer Fire Department, Telegraph Ridge, Honeydew, Fruitland Ridge, Oric, Orleans, Petrolia, Salmon Creek, Bridgeville, Graceland, Whitethorn, Willow Creek, and West Haven. So I love saying that because those are communities that we don't get to talk about much, and we should, because they really need these services. RCEA will serve as a project lead, but each of these departments are going to own and operate the equipment themselves. And what we'll do is walk through the permitting, design, and installation, and then it's like we hand over the keys, and they own the equipment. So I am asking the board to authorize the execution of the grant agreement once it's finalized and reviewed by general counsel. And then I have the language changed in this action language from the staff report on the participation agreement. So we want to authorize the intermediate to execute participation agreement with each of the fire station project partners pending RCEA general counsel review. Nancy has already reviewed the agreement. However, our project partners have not reviewed the agreement. And so we'd like the ability for general counsel to review to make sure there are no substantive changes that they may, each project partner might have a little change they would like to make, and we would like to be nimble. I will say the timeline on this grant is we have 2.5 years to get this done. So we want to hit the ground running. So we don't want to leave any money or project money unspent and project unfinished.
And then I want to add something really quickly. One thing that may have to change in it is technically substantive in the partnership agreement, and that's why I want to bring it to your attention, although it's minor. But that is the name of the tribal partners, because I would imagine that the tribal volunteer departments and as well as the Karuk Natural Resources Department, they're actually not the parties to the agreement. The parties to the agreement will be the tribal entities, but that will be clarified, and that is technically substantive because it's a change in partners. So anyway, I just want you all to be aware of that one change that might happen.
All right, go ahead.
Is there any ability to add EV charging stations to these fire stations?
That's a great question. For this grant, no, but we do have another CEC grant, which we're looking at EV charging stations in rural areas, and we're constantly looking for additional grant funds. And so that is one item on our radar, especially with the vehicle to grid capability that almost becomes another battery in an emergency event. So not yet.
Any other questions or comments on this? Before we take it to public comment? Anybody in the room? Anybody online? All right, I will bring it back for this motion up here.
I'll make a motion, David.
Okay.
As it's presented by staff.
Second.
All right. Motion by Wilson, second by Bauer, all in favor? Aye. And Director Mobley has left. Unanimous minus one absence. All right, that'll take us to our interim executive director's report. I feel like that's the first time I got to say that.
So just end on some more good news. I just wanted to share that our e-bike voucher launched April 2nd, and as of April 18th, RCEA staff, which has been working tirelessly, has issued 67 vouchers. Wow. Including one adaptive e-bike, which we're really proud of. All but 6 of the vouchers were issued to income qualified customers. So that was the big change in this e-bike voucher program, is that we were really trying to target citizens that may use these as a primary source of transportation throughout the county. I didn't write down the numbers, but we have gotten a big push in Arcata. So Arcata has
announcing it.
Issued funds to give to Arcata residents, and so I think we're about a quarter of the way through that money already. And we're, we just want to keep going, so we'll be making sure that we put funds in next year's budget to keep this program going, because it's what's pretty remarkable, this state hasn't launched their voucher program yet, and we already have this uptake. So we think once the state issues theirs, which we're hoping will be during Bike Month, which is in May, we'll get even more. The other exciting news is we successfully submitted the tariff grant a day before the deadline. Thanks to a huge push between SHOTS, our staff, and our tribal partners. I feel like I've gotten to make so many new friends through this process. And we have already received a notice of intent from the state for a $6 million match funding grant from the CEC. And they're just waiting on the DOE to award, and then we'll negotiate that grant agreement. So, you know, as I said last month, we're seeing eyes on the CEC from start of announcing this $6 million grant to them approving it was a 2-week timeline. So that is will go down in history as the fastest grant from start to finish. But I think it shows how excited people are to see this project be successful.
All right, any questions on that? Not seeing any, I guess, do we do public comment on this? I guess it's up there. Any comment? Any comment? All right, so that takes us to future agenda items. So, any?
Mine's gonna be probably happier than yours.
Yeah.
Maybe not. Actually, I was wondering, for next time, is there, or maybe even now, is there any update with rural red?
No, so we're awaiting a CPUC decision, and they don't give us a timeline on when that comes out. So
Just wondering.
we're at the mercy of the CPUC on that one.
Just
On
wondering.
a lot of things.
But we will definitely be coming back to the board once they issue their decision.
Go ahead, Scott.
I apologize for being late. But I needed to tell you all that. I think this next city council meeting, I convinced our finance director to join the Power Plus. So, discussing that. But I'm excited to mention that. I did want to ask about Senate Bill 1999. You all are aware of that. It basically is trying to cap the fixed rate that PG&E wants to charge. And it really matters because the CPs, the IOUs want a high rate, tiered rate. It's pretty substantial. It reduces the incentive for solar because you're adding this cost. It's a fixed cost. It doesn't increase the price of your bill, but you would always have, say, $60 a month, regardless of what your solar panels are producing. This bill would make it a 5 and a 10, $5 for the care program people, $10 for the rest of us. So I don't know if that's something we want to discuss here or the CCAs are doing it. I suggest entities here to talk to their cities or counties, or whatever, to support that bill. But I didn't know if that's something that we talk about.
So one of our CCA partners, Ava, right, Ava, that developed a model to see how it's called the income graduated fixed charge, how that will affect CCA customers by region, because it's very dependent on use and load, and so Richard's staff has been crunching the numbers, looking, because even our inland residents will be affected much differently than our coastal residents. And so we're using that modeling and are hoping to bring it back to the board so that you'll see, based on the way it's proposed now, what it will mean to Humboldt County residents, and even a little bit more nuanced than that. You know, our eastern hotter climate, hotter in the summer, colder in the winter versus our coastal. I feel like May is already a packed agenda, but it's an important issue. So we have it and we're working on it. Just trying to find time to.
Maybe we have time till the bills and all that come through, but yeah, it's kind of try and expedite their discussion. Another thing, I won't talk about the CPUC anymore, beat that horse. But I did talk to, at this conference, I went to a lot of CCA people, city council members that are on CCAs, And I asked about rebates, and it's the wrong time to talk about it, given this, what was that called, the slice of the day or whatever. But there, some of them are pretty substantial rebates over the IOUs. So the inland desert region, 4 or 8%, you know, some are higher than that. Just want us to be thinking about what our rebate is.
Discount.
Discount.
Right,
You
yeah.
know, sorry about that. But that's something that just keeps coming up, and for us to be competitive against the IOUs, I'm just wondering how we address that. So that's it.
And maybe that could be
Not
modeled
vague.
in our budget, perhaps, as we're going into budget season to look at, you know, what different rates of discount could look like.
Yeah.
For our future.
And
Yeah.
And I feel like a few of us have brought that up, just especially with how much people are hurting with the current increase in rates, and any little bit, I feel like helps people, so.
We did talk at last month or the month before's meeting, one of the most recent meetings about the board, I think before I was on the board, there was a goal of having a certain amount of reserves before
Yep.
Yeah.
re-examining that discount. I'm open to still talking about that, but it came up in our board meeting as well. Our last board of supervisors meeting. From Supervisor Bum, he wanted to know why we didn't have a greater discount, so we talked about it.
He's been there,
so,
so.
yeah. Yeah.
And I will say, you know, our goal is maintaining at least some discount.
Yeah.
And then having benefits to being an RCA customer. And so, you know, and we can get into this more, but we're keeping the money local, we're putting it back, investing, you know, some of the projects we talked about today that we're able to invest in, that, you know, the IOUs are not going to be, you know, necessarily interested in pursuing. So there are other benefits to being a RCA customer than the discount. So and we want to ensure the longevity of RCA. So, you know, we have to weigh the discount with being able to weather these ups and downs, the storms that, you know, because we are at the mercy of the market.
Understood. I appreciate it. One last thing. I'm sorry. We go to a conference and all these ideas get thrown around. I would like for us at some point to explore, I've mentioned municipal owned utility before.
Yes.
But I was thinking of something like Blue Lake, like you start small, here's a small RCEA partners with tribal entity, the city, and we buy the infrastructure and we own it. And maybe we set up an energy park and that big ground you have, you know, and it's full of RA. But start somewhere to try and get away to cut the line from PG&E and they're feeding us in. But I think that's the only solution to dealing with the monster that is investor-owned utilities. That's like a big grand idea, but something we should all be thinking about. Really fun.
But I think we can start small.
Yeah. Perfect.
Well, and I feel like there was a conversation probably about like a year ago of some guy who lives locally who was part of the movement on like Kauai to.
So that was distribution.
To buy everything. I mean, that's municipal run utility, is you own it all. You own distribution and generation. And you probably saw people from Sacramento touting about their low rates. Okay,
Yes.
Natalie, I think we're gonna have to
Word now. Just kidding. I wanted to bring back up Elise's point about a class and comp study. So I appreciate the action you took earlier, and at some future agenda where we don't have as packed an agenda, it'd be great to bring that back about what that would look like as far as cost and time frame. Because I don't think we've done a robust one. Looking at Christie, we've done comps, but sort of like a less deep dive into that. So I think that could be helpful to bring back for consideration.
I agree. All right, anybody else before we adjourn? Yes, get.
I didn't hear the response to Sherry's rural rent.
No updates. We're waiting on the CPUC to tell us what's gonna happen.
All
That's
the,
on.
all the
It's on there.
filings have been made.
Okay. And I'll bring this up briefly. Are we gonna have, I feel unfinished with biomass.
Are we all?
Are we going to, I've been clarifying the contract. The monitoring that's going on. Is there a future with biomass? Just a plan, 6 months or a year or 5 years down the road. Might it come back for us to discuss?
I think, for a future agenda item, to bring back to the board would be the study that the Air Quality District is having a third party conduct. And I think at the meeting, Director Arroyo asked to get a copy of that report, and we reached out letting them know that we're interested in that. So that might be a good chance to bring that back to the board when we have a little bit more information from this study that hasn't been conducted yet, but is in the works.
Okay.
Perfect. All right. With that, not seeing any more hands, we're adjourned.